So I would like to go on with our day today and to announce the next speaker that we will have with us, Annie Machon, Magnus Ag, again, that you already saw before on stage. And the panel is moderated by Annegret Falter. And also probably you saw on the flyers that we have another name, Silvanos Mudzvova, supposed to be on our panel. But unfortunately, due also to really difficult visa regulation, we were not able to have him here with us. And also because we needed to provide insurance that as a small organization without fixed funded, we were not able. So at the end, we agree with Silvanos that he could be here in spirit with us, and he also prepared a video about his case that is also really important because it's related to torture in Zimbabwe, and we asked Magnus Ag to speak about him. So in a sense, he will be a bit with us even if he's not. And by the way, I also wanted to say that at the moment he is in residency at the University of Manchester. So if you are interested in his case, he's totally up for speaking about that, also for interviews. So he totally told me that he would be happy to speak with people if you are interested to contact him. So in a sense, he's not here, but I also hope that perhaps in the future also other organizations in Berlin would have the possibility to invite him. And now we go on with our panel, and I would say I would like, first of all, to introduce the panel through a video, because as we mentioned before, the 17th of May, Chelsea Manning will walk free after 7 years of prison detention. And this is really an important moment, since initially she was supposed to serve 35 years in prison. And for that, especially here in Berlin, we want to thank a lot the Chelsea Manning Initiative Berlin for their work they did since 2011 until now. That was really a work with a lot of passion, a lot of effort. And I think that's also from the Disruption Lab, I want to give really special thanks because they have been with us really for many events doing a wonderful work. So I really would like to thank all together the Chelsea Manning Initiative Berlin. And so because of that, I think this panel should start with the video that the initiative prepared, especially for this occasion of celebration of Chelsea. And before also watching the video, I would like to announce the moderator of the panel, Annegret Falter, that is the chair of the Whistleblower Netzwerk e.V., also the cooperation partner of this event. And Annegret, from 1999 to 2014, was a member of the jury bestowing the German Whistleblower Award. And among the winners are indeed Chelsea Manning in 2011, Edward Snowden in 2013, Brandon Bryant in 2015. And I'm also really happy to say that since Brandon was here with us at our very first event in April 2015. And I also want to thank a lot the Whistleblower Netzwerk e.V. because they do a really important job in Germany for advocacy and protection and knowledge dissemination about whistleblowing. And they also speak a lot about the case of whistleblowers in Germany that are also not so well known international as the one that everybody always mentions. So they do also really an important job. So I would like to thank them too. So now I will go down on stage. We will start with the video by the Chelsea Manning Initiative, and then we will have the people on stage. And for the question and answer, John Kiriakou will also come back on stage and do the final rounds with the public. So thanks a lot again for staying longer here, and please let's show the video. Thank you. And turn down the lights, please.
What did you learn in school today, dear little boy of mine? What did you learn in school today, dear little boy of mine? I learned that Washington never told a lie. I learned that soldiers seldom die.
Helping even the United States for a process to get more healthy. Weil das ist offenbar die einzige Chance, die es da gibt. Wenn die Leute besser verstehen, was passiert, darum geht es mit der Transparenz, mit der Informationsfreiheit, dann können sie auch bessere Entscheidungen treffen. Das ist Demokratie. Everything else is theater.
So. I learned that policemen are my friends. I learned that justice never ends. I learned that murderers die for the crime, even if we make a mistake sometimes.
He hasn't tried to sell this information to any country or to anyone or to any organization. And he did this not for himself, not for his own profits. Yeah, he did this because he thinks it belongs to public.
Yeah,
es geht ja darum, dass jemand praktisch verdächtigt wird, sich im Dienst seiner Feinde zu begeben. Und es gab eben vor 70 Jahren, 71 Jahren Menschen hier in Berlin, sie sind dann als Landesverräter verurteilt worden. Das war gewissermaßen der Strafstand für Spionage. Sie und alle, die davon mit ihnen in Berührung kamen, davon wussten, sind ebenfalls vom Reichskriegsgericht zum Tode verurteilt worden. Darunter auch meine Eltern.
Here in Washington, D.C., or actually Fort Meade, Maryland. And we're here to support Bradley Manning in this trial. They're trying to stifle freedom of speech. They're trying to overclassify every bit of information that comes out of this government. And it's time to expose the lies, tell the truth. Bradley Manning is helping us do that. And I praise Bradley Manning as a true American hero.
We need to free Bradley Manning because he set us free. He set us free in our souls and our minds. He set the world free with the truth, and we need to let him free.
Hero helping even the United States for a process to get more healthy. Weil das ist offenbar die einzige Chance, die es da gibt. Wenn die Leute besser verstehen, was passiert, darum geht es mit der Transparenz, mit der Informationsfreiheit, dann können sie auch bessere Entscheidungen treffen. Das ist Demokratie. Everything else is theater. So.
He hasn't tried to sell this information to any country or to anyone or to any organization. And he did this not for himself, not for his own profits. Yeah, he did this because he thinks it belongs to public.
Yeah, he's done it for us.
Who's subject to treatment described by Hunter.
The A needs to be straight, yeah. Okay, no, yeah. Keep him in one line, people, keep him in one line. The S for Chelsea needs to go a little bit right and down. The A needs to be... Pay attention, people, you're going to be here forever. The H needs to go right a little bit. To my right, stage right, yeah. Okay, we're good. A needs to go right a little bit, N needs to go up. We're there. Okay. Yeah.
And take the G, actually.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
Smile.
really bright here. John Kiriakou, would you please? Oh, I see. Good. So I have been asked to say a few words about Chelsea Manning to start out with, and I wonder whether all of you have read his statement, which was just now published on the website of his legal team. Have you read his statement? Or otherwise, I would very quickly read it out to you. Is that okay? Okay, so I will. So that is the statement of Chelsea Manning upon her upcoming release from prison. For the first time, I can see a future for myself as Chelsea. I can imagine surviving and living as the person who I am and can finally be in the outside world. Freedom used to be something that I dreamt of but never allowed myself to fully imagine. Now, freedom is something that I will again experience with friends and loved ones after nearly 7 years of bars and cement, of periods of solitary confinement, and of my health care and autonomy restricted, including thorough, routinely forced haircuts. She lived as a transgender female in an all-male prison. And I'm forever grateful to the people who kept me alive, President Obama, my legal team, and countless supporters. I watched the world change from inside prison walls and through the letters that I have received from veterans, trans young people, parents, politicians, and artists. My spirits were lifted in dark times, reading of their support, sharing in their triumphs, and helping them through challenges of their own. I hope to take the lesson that I have learned, the love that I have been given, and the hope that I have to work toward making life better for others. So that's what she wrote as of May 9th, a few days ago. So what we saw of in this video were snapshots, basically. It's once again, it was our friend Nadine who did that, and I too want to thank her very much for her steadiness and kindness. The snapshots that come to my mind are basically three when I hear the name Chelsea Manning. It's the collateral murder video. It's the unlawful pre-trial treatment in prison, and it's the Espionage Act. The collateral murder video. Killing civilians, non-combatants. Like in a video game, a helicopter crew, I mean, you probably all know the video. Calling, killing, engagement, it's also this incredibly violent and brutal language, and all that under the oversight of their superiors. It's not just a helicopter crew doing that, but they're in constant contact with their superiors. And it's clearly a crime. It's against international law and the Geneva Convention. And once again, like in John's case, only Chelsea Manning was prosecuted for that, and nobody else, and no one from the helicopter crew. So the second thing I remember is the unlawful, cruel confinement in the Quantico prison. His attorney, David Coombs, had said he was almost gone at that time. And I think the condition the conditions there are best described by Graham Nash in a song. He sang, locked up in a white room underneath a glaring light. Every 5 minutes, they're asking me if I'm all right. Locked up in a white room, naked as the day I was born. 24 bright light, 24 all alone. And all legal experts were agreed that this was an unusual, cruel treatment before any trial. And the goal, and thinking about the goal, why they were so terribly cruel with Chelsea. For one thing, of course, they wanted to set an example. They wanted to intimidate other whistleblowers, and they were pretty successful, I guess, with that. One could also assume that they were pressuring Chelsea to testify against WikiLeaks and Julian Assange so that they could file charges against him, and what they now do, by the way. I think you all heard about the charges that the State Department, that the Department of Justice is supposed to bring forward soon, indicting Julian under the Espionage Act too, and also some other charges. It's also theft of government. Government belongings and whatever. So the third thing I am thinking of is the Espionage Act, and it is important to realize that Chelsea Manning was the first to be not only indicted but also convicted under the Espionage Act, and that means, and the major points about that are there is no public interest defense possible, no exonerating arguments like the motives and intentions of a whistleblower, and whether he caused harm or damage or not played no role. None of the documents that Chelsea published resulted in personal or military strategic harm. And the Center for Constitutional Rights, as well as Ellsberg, very early in the 1970s, after he had published the Pentagon Papers, claimed that this law was unconstitutional, being applied to whistleblowers, and right now, Chelsea, from all that I know and am informed about, Chelsea is going to challenge the constitutionality of the Espionage Act right now before the appellation court, and after that, I think everybody has decided to proceed to the Supreme Court. So that is the state of the art right now. Chelsea has been commuted. The sentence of Chelsea has been commuted. He wasn't pardoned, he was commuted. It was commuted, and that is probably also due to an outpouring of support from the public over her mistreatment in prison. And what I learned from the website of her legal team is that she will go on fighting in her appeal to clear her name, Right now, Chelsea is not being ready for interviews. The legal team will answer interviews, and a few weeks ago, I talked to her former attorney, David Coombs, and he said if anybody wants an interview, they have to turn to her agent. So obviously there are so many people who want to talk to her that she needs somebody to handle that for her. I now have the honor to introduce the panel. and it's my very pleasure to present one fabulous whistleblower and both of them distinguished speakers. The first to speak is Annie Machon. Sitting next to me here, Annie Machon was an intelligence officer for the UK Security Service, MI5, before resigning to help blow the whistle on the crimes and incompetences of the British spy agencies. She is now a writer, media pundit, and international public speaker on issues like wars, on terrorism, on whistleblowers and whistleblowing on drugs, and on the internet. And she's also a member of the Sam Adams Association. Annie, is there anything you're going to speak about the secrecy laws in the UK? Is there anything comparable to the Espionage Act?
Yes, in fact, I'm going to, you'll probably gather I'm British from my accent, and I'm going to blush yet again. I've been blushing a lot this year, ever since last year, with the Brexit vote. Now I'm going to blush again, because in fact, I think it was the UK that gave the world the notion of such laws as the Espionage Act 1917 in the United States. So Britain once again set a wonderful example, because in 1911, they produced the first official Secrets Act, which was put in place before the First World War to try and root out German spies, sorry, Germany, put them on trial and shoot them if necessary. Now, this law has stayed in place. It is still there to prosecute traitors. And in fact, we've had a number of traitors throughout the 20th century, most notably the Cambridge spy ring, which was Burgess, Philby, Maclean, and a few others, who were establishment figures who betrayed the country egregiously for decades, and yet all of them somehow magically were allowed to slip away to Russia. They're establishment. However, if you're a whistleblower, the treatment is somewhat harsher. So we have the 1911 Act, and it was upgraded a couple of times in the 1920s and 1930s. But then there was a series of whistleblowing cases in the 1980s, most notably the very notorious book called Spycatcher, written by a disgruntled former senior MI5 officer called Peter Wright. And because of all these spy scandals in the 1980s, the Thatcher government at the time decided to upgrade the Official Secrets Act to specifically bar whistleblowing. And that became known as the 1989 Act. And under that Act, it says that anyone who is or has been an intelligence officer for any of the 3 key spy agencies in the UK, and who speaks to anyone outside that agency, automatically faces 2 years in prison because they've blown the whistle, they've disclosed information they shouldn't have. There is no defense, there is no public interest defense, there is no opportunity to put in front of a jury of your peers why you did what you did, and the evidence that you're allowed to present about your disclosures is severely limited. So it's a very one-sided act. And I'm now going to just move on a little bit to some personal reminiscences before bringing the current legislation that they are proposing in the UK, which is getting worse and worse and worse in the face of more whistleblowers. Just to sort of fill you in on quite how bad it is in the UK. And I have a sense that where the UK leads, as they did in 1911, the rest of the world begins to follow. And I say that with knowledge, because this year as well, on the 1st of January, we had a new law put in place called the Investigatory Powers Act. And this legalized what was previously illegally done by our snooping agency, GCHQ, for the last 17 years. This has put in the most draconian sweeping new surveillance powers, including bulk metadata, bulk hacking, bulk data collection. And that applies not just to the UK, but they will use it against everyone across Europe as well, by the way. And this law went in against huge opposition, and yet it was still forced in. And now we're seeing that those well-known liberal democracies, such as Russia and China, are now beginning also to copy the UK new legislation. They're saying, well, if the UK can do it, what's wrong with that? Let's do it ourselves. So I'm sure that any new secrecy legislation the UK brings in will also be copied by other countries, both our allies and our notional adversaries. But first of all, I just want to say, it's wonderful to finally get a chance to meet John Kiriakou. As an intelligence whistleblower of 20 years standing now, God, it's so old, I can't believe it's 20 years ago that we ended up blowing the whistle. Because of that, I've been very, very interested in following every subsequent whistleblower case. Of course, I followed John's case with interest and with great concern. So I just want to pay tribute to his courage for what he did then, and also for his continuing courage for what he is doing now. So please give him a round of applause. Annegret mentioned the Sam Adams Associates, and this is a loose affiliation of whistleblowers from around the world, from the intelligence, the military and the diplomatic corps. And every year we give an award to those who display integrity in intelligence. And last year we gave that award to John, and I think it was very, very well deserved. But it was interesting as well to listen to what he was saying earlier, because it brought back a lot of memories for me. Because back in the 1990s, we probably started around the same time, actually, in our intelligence careers, but mine was much shorter. Back in the 1990s, I was recruited to work for MI5, which is the UK Domestic Security Service. And I was there only for 6 years. And I was there in its only marginally ethical decade, in its 100-year existence. And it was also there that I met a man who became my partner, as well as my colleague. My former partner, a man called David Shaler. And after only 6 years, we had seen so many things going wrong that, again, we felt compelled to speak out about them. We had tried to raise our concerns while we were on the inside, and we were repeatedly told, do not rock the boat and just follow orders. So after 6 years of this, we resigned and we went public. And it was a whole range of different things that caused concern for us, including files on our government ministers, files on hundreds of thousands of our fellow citizens for their political activism, illegal telephone taps, IRA bombs that could and should have been prevented going off on UK streets, and then MI5, crucially, lying to the government to cover up their mistakes. There's a case of 2 innocent students going to prison when MI5 had evidence of their innocence. And it culminated in an illegal assassination plot against Colonel Gaddafi of Libya in 1996, where MI6, our sort of James Bond wing of British intelligence, well, they like to think so anyway, where MI6 had funded a branch of Al-Qaeda, at that time known to be our terrorist enemies, even in 1996. MI6 had funded these people to try and assassinate Gaddafi. And the operation was illegal under UK law because they didn't get the prior written permission of their political master. And it went wrong because Gaddafi obviously survived to be assassinated another day in 2011, but innocent people died. So at this point, we felt compelled to try and do something about this. So, as I said, we resigned. We went public, and we preemptively went on the run around Europe to avoid automatic arrest under the draconian terms of the 1989 Official Secrets Act. So we literally had 1 month on the run around Europe. We then had another year living in hiding in a remote and very primitive French farmhouse. And then David was arrested because the British tried to extradite him from France, where he'd taken refuge, to take him back to the UK to stand trial under the Official Secrets Act. And we were in Paris at that time, talking to some journalists, and he just disappeared. He was snatched off the street. And the first I knew of his arrest was when I had a knock on the hotel door from the French security service, the DST at the time. And they said, we have Monsieur Shaler. And I said, well, you know, is he under arrest? No, we're just taking him away for questioning. And I asked if I could see him. They said no. And that was the last I saw of him for almost 2 months. He disappeared into the French prison system, and even his lawyers couldn't track him down for 72 hours. And when they eventually did track him down, only the lawyers were allowed to see him because the French had been told by the British that he was a traitor, a super spy selling secrets to enemy powers. So they put him under very stringent secrecy laws, effectively almost solitary confinement, and I wasn't allowed to see him. And it was only after the paperwork finally emerged from the British government requesting his extradition after 2 months that they realized what they had in their prison cell was a whistleblower, not a traitor. And under French law, you cannot be extradited for whistleblowing because it is deemed, or was deemed at the time, to be a political act. So he was released, and that was fabulous. And in fact, we had taken prior legal advice before we went on the run of which country would be best to hide in. And ironically, back in 1997, we were told France would be good because they protect whistleblowers, and so would the USA. And you sort of think, what the hell happened there? Luckily, we settled on France because it was easier to get, it was a bit closer to the UK. So he was released, and we had another 2 years living in Paris, relatively free, although he could not leave France, because if he went to any other European country at that point, he too would face another extradition request and probably would have been extradited. But he went back in the year 2000 to face trial, to say, this is what I said, I stand by it, I want it read into the public record, I want my day in court to justify what I did. So he went back voluntarily, and of course was immediately arrested when he set foot on UK soil. And we thought the trial would be fairly rapid. I mean, everything had happened almost 3 years ago. Surely the Metropolitan Police had concluded their investigation after 3 years, right? Instead, we were dragged through a whole series of pre-trial hearings, which were designed to inhibit increasingly what he was actually finally allowed to say during his trial. And this went on for over 2 years. So by the time he was able to stand up in front of a jury of his peers, he was not allowed to say why he'd done what he'd done. He was not allowed to use a public interest defense. In fact, he wasn't allowed to ask any questions without the prosecuting lawyer vetting them ahead of time and crossing them all out. It was a kangaroo court. And some of it was conducted in secret too. So inevitably, he was convicted. And he was facing 3 charges, each carrying 2 years in prison. However, the only time either of us in this whole legal process were ever allowed to say anything about why we had done what we'd done, ironically, was after his conviction, but before his sentencing, when, rather stupidly, I talked myself into giving what was known as a mitigation plea. So I could explain our reasons. I could explain what had happened. And the judge, at that point, just gave him 6 months instead of 6 years. So that was a good-ish result. Having said that, though, there was also the reputational rape that happened in the newspapers and the media after his conviction. So the judge also said in his final official ruling, he accepted that Shayla had done what he'd done in what he thought was the public interest, not that that was a legal defense, that there was no financial motivation, and that no agent lives had ever been put at risk through his whistleblowing. And yet, the headlines on all the newspapers the next day said precisely the opposite. Shayla sells agent lives down the river for money. I sort of think, where the hell did that come from? I was sitting in the courtroom watching the journalists write down the judge's words, which it makes you begin to speculate along very paranoid and interesting lines about quite how much control the spies can exert over our wonderful free press. So David went to prison again. He'd spent 4 months in prison in Paris, in a very primitive and draconian prison, which has now been shut down on humanitarian grounds, by the way. And then he was sent to prison in the UK. Now, he was a low security risk. He should have immediately gone to a low security prison. Oh no, they took almost a month to decide on what his official category would be. And in that month, he was put in the notorious Belmarsh prison, which is the highest security prison in the UK, housing terrorists, crime lords, all the rest of it. And he was daily under physical threat. And he was very stressed about it. And I sort of said, well, how did you try and get the threats to back off? And again, hearing what John was saying brought back a lot of memories of what David told me. And he said there was one point where this huge guy came up to him and tried to push him off the one public phone he was allowed to use. And he put round this rumor that he could kill with his bare hands because that was his training in MI5, which is absolutely not the case, by the way, and I can't do that either, I promise. And this huge guy just backed off in sort of abject terror. But it's an incredibly stressful thing to go through. I mean, the whole case from start to finish went for 7 years, from when we took the decision in 1996 to when he was finally a free man who had paid his so-called debt to society. And in those years, in the media, you are pilloried as a traitor, or you are supported as a hero. And it's a very difficult dichotomy to live with as an individual, I think. And in fact, unfortunately, I think that stress did get to him. We separated over 10 years ago now, and he's happily ensconced in his new life as a reincarnation of Jesus Christ, I think. Which I know sounds funny, but if you think this guy has such a sharp brain, he was such a good officer, such a good man, and this is what living with those years of stress can do to someone. So that's the price that whistleblowers pay, and I know many other whistleblowers who have been destroyed, either financially or psychologically, by what they go through. And it's wonderful to see some of us still out there, some of us still thriving, and John obviously still very much kicking butt, which is what we all need to do. So that was the case then. I just want to conclude with a few remarks about what's going on in the UK now, because I've been watching in horror at what is now called the war on whistleblowers in the USA. You know, this overuse of this bogus law, the Espionage Act, illegally to prosecute people who are blowing the whistle. But the UK is also trying to reform its official secrets laws. So we have the old OSA 1911 for traitors, OSA 1989 for whistleblowers. Now, they're getting their knickers in a twist in the British government about this apparent increasing threat of the insider threat, like whistleblowers, and organizations like WikiLeaks, which publish those disclosures. So they are reviewing all these old laws, and they've come up with some wonderfully stupid proposals. First of all, they're going to clump the early Official Secrets Act into something new called the Espionage Act. Strangely enough, I wonder where they got that idea from. And then for the whistleblowing, they're going to create a new law called the Disclosure Act. Now this will apply to whistleblowers and raise the prison tariff from 2 years to 14. This will also mean that organizations that help disclosure, such as the media, and one thinks particularly, probably they're thinking along the lines of WikiLeaks, can also be prosecuted and face the same tariff. And also they're going to expand it. At the moment, the Official Secrets Acts only apply to British citizens. However, they're going to expand it now to any national who facilitates the publication of official secrets. So, of course, again, they're thinking Julian Assange, one presumes. And finally, for example, I'm a former intelligence officer. If I go out and talk about stuff that is already in the public domain, such as a lot of very detailed information in my old book that was cleared by MI5, or other information that I learn from other whistleblowers, such as John Kiriakou, or any of the other Sam Adams whistleblowers, they want to criminalize me again by taking away what is known as the public domain defense, i.e., that information is already in the public domain, so anyone should be able to talk about it. And they are saying now, or proposing, that if I do that, or if John talks about something I discuss, or any other UK whistleblower does that, then we are in a situation where, because we're serving our former intelligence officers, we are amplifying the gravitas of repeating that information, giving it credibility. So they're going to try and take away that defense for me and others as well. So this is sliding precipitously down an incredibly dangerous path. And my big fear is that other European countries particularly will no doubt start to follow, as they have already started to follow with the Investigatory Powers Act, the Snoopers Charter. And it's not just Russia and China that have picked up on that. Countries like Germany and Norway are also following suit. So Britain, unfortunately, is blundering again down the diametrically wrong path that it should be going. And many of us in the UK have been advocating for years there should be a formal whistleblowing channel for those with meaningful ethical concerns coming out of central government, the intelligence agencies, the military, the diplomatic corps, where they can go without jeopardizing not only their professional lives, but their liberty, with the assumption and trust that what they disclose will be properly investigated, and if crimes have indeed been committed, those criminals will be held to account, not the whistleblower. And I would suggest, just to conclude, that that would be the most obvious win-win situation that any intelligence agency or any government could possibly suggest, because you avoid the whistleblowing scandal. You don't have inquiries, you don't have hearings after the event, you don't have the press building itself up into a media frenzy, and the spies loathe that. But also the whistleblower doesn't have to turn their lives inside out, upside down, go through prison, and deal with that trauma. So if they suggest in Germany some sort of equivalent Official Secrets Act, please push back, rally, activate, fight it, and suggest the alternative, the win-win scenario, because it will help everyone. It will save the whistleblower, it will improve the work of the spy agencies, and it will allow them, therefore, to protect all of us much better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annie. Annie, may I ask a quick question? What about the public? What about the general public? Remember Snowden, he said, it's not me who decides how much freedom we are trading in for security. He wanted to inform the public. He wanted to have a democratic discourse going on. And the solution that you propose excludes that. And I think one should think twice about that.
Well, I'm suggesting actually that if there is a proper channel for potential whistleblowers to go down, and they do disclose crime, and there is a proper investigation, and a trial, then of course that information is going to come out, but via the trial rather than via a blaze of publicity. It's probably not perfect, but it's either that or more whistleblowers coming out, more whistleblowers risking their lives in many cases, and ruining their futures and going to prison. So I think that would be a good first step, and put the whole concept of whistleblowing very much in the public consciousness again, but give it legal backing.
Or maybe try to strengthen the possibilities of defense in the public interest, like the European Council proposed.
Yeah,
but we're not going to have a private discussion here. I have the pleasure to introduce Magnus. Oh, actually, he was introduced already, and so I say maybe for those who came a little later, let me just mention that Magnus Ag is a Berlin-based international human rights and freedom of expression advocate. He works at Freemuse, an international civil society organization defending and promoting the right to artistic freedom and freedom worldwide. Prior to joining Freemuse in 2015, Magnus spent 5 years with the Committee to Protect Journalists in New York. And right now here he is going to speak about why art is not a crime. And he's going to speak about Freemuse and how they defend artistic freedom. And before doing that, he told me he was going to change hats, and he will now introduce Silvanos Mudzvova, who is, and I regret, and I think Tatjana has already said that he couldn't come, and so Magnus is going to speak with his hat on now.
Yeah, so I'm back again, but yeah, and I really wish Silvanos could be here. I think he would have loved this. I talked to him earlier this week. He says hi, and thank you very much to Tatjana for all her work and the whole team to getting him here and giving the opportunity to at least show this video. And Tatjana asked me to introduce him. I met Silvanos first time a couple of years ago in Harare in Zimbabwe, and was so impressed with his work, and I've stayed in touch with him. He describes himself as a performing arts activist. And I don't want to go into too many details about him because he does a much better job about explaining his own project in the video. But I thought maybe a bit of a background on Zimbabwe might be helpful, since it's not top of mind for everyone here. And I have a few slides. First of all, here is Zimbabwe. And I wanted to ask you guys, how many here are 37 years old or younger? Can you just see a show of hands? It's a lot of hands. Can you remember, or do you know who was president when, when those of you that are 37 were born, so in 1980, in your respective countries? Anyone remember? Just here's the slide, the next one that kind of gives you an idea about the situation in Zimbabwe. Robert Mugabe, he was president, or he was prime minister in 1980. He won an election in 1979, the first free election in Zimbabwe after they gained independence from the United Kingdom. He was part of the liberation movement. He merged that into a presidency a few years later, as we see other people do these days. And then he stayed in power ever since. And he has a stronghold of power. And there's been some elections with questionable results. There's very limited freedoms to talk about these things. There's a state-owned press for the most part. And to really appreciate what it is Silvanos is doing, it's important to understand how that has dominated society for a generation, right? To think of not having had anyone else as head of state and not seeing any alternative. You can imagine, like, expressing yourself about these things are very, very tricky.
It would be like having Margaret Thatcher still in power.
Yeah. And just some context on what he's done, like he introduced these land reforms, among other things. It's probably what he's most famous for internationally, because Zimbabwe, when it was Rhodesia, where there's a lot of white farmers that owned huge parts of land, made a lot of money, but also produced a lot of goods. And these land reforms were highly controversial, and they made not all, but a significant part of the white farmers leave. And then the farms were taken over by black Zimbabweans who didn't have the resource or didn't manage to keep the same level of productivity. So what was once known as the breadbasket of the region, it's a very fertile area, is now, or has had trouble even feeding its own population. And maybe with the next slide, one of the things that has come across is this hyperinflation. I don't know if you remember 2008. They had like insane inflation. I think I have an inflation rate for mid-November 2008. The inflation rate was 79 billion%. So you can imagine, like, this is a picture, of course, of a guy starving billionaire. You could not use your money. You couldn't get a piece of bread for the bill with the infinite amount of zeros on it. It is a complete wrecked economy. And Mugabe has managed to stay in power throughout this. And by repressing any kind of opposition, have a new constitution that is actually fairly well written from 2013, and like the words are good, but guaranteeing freedom of expression, the right to artistic freedom, which affects Silvanos' media rights. But then you have a censorship law, you have a censorship board, you have practices by the police where they target journalists or artists and activists, jailing them, and kind of a real sense of insecurity and a lot of self-censorship around everyone that try to express anything. So that's the quick run through of Zimbabwe, and then I think if we can show the video of Silvanos, you'll see how cool he is.
My name is Silvanos Mudzvova. I'm a performing arts activist from Zimbabwe. Just to give you a little bit of background so that you are in the clear picture. Our country, Zimbabwe, has got 14 million citizens. We have been ruled by one president since 1980 until today. We only have got one television station that is catering for 14 million citizens. And they have lost confidence in terms of receiving propaganda that is being churned out on that TV station. So, theater, as artists, we have become the other alternative that is available for people to access information. Last year, I decided to actually take my theater from the traditional theater and bringing it to the ground. What others would call hit and run theater, others would want to call it guerrilla theater, or just normal street theater. What I've been doing since last year is the president openly come up in the open and said the country lost 15 billion United States dollars of diamond revenue. And no one was arrested. not even a single investigation was done into this case. Then I decided to say, the parliament is silent about this issue. How best can I actually be part and parcel of this whole process? And then I created a play that was titled Missing Diamonds, whereby after creating the play, it was a short thing that I just wanted to do quickly and then make sure that I do it in front of the parliament. MPs get the message so that at least they debate about this issue inside the Augusta House. So when I actually performed and I was arrested, it actually brought a lot of attention to the Zimbabwean community to say, I think we need to start talking about this issue. And then the MPs started deliberating the issue in parliament the same day that I was arrested. Theatre is actually worked as a catalyst of actually provoking debate from the parliamentarians, the citizens themselves. But what I got was really threatened by the police officers, the Central Intelligence. When they arrested me, they threatened me with disappearance, like what had happened to a colleague of mine who went missing on the 9th of March 2015, and he hasn't been found until today. So I thought it was like one of the things that they always do, to say that they would actually want to stop me. I started receiving strange phone calls. I was being followed at times, but I thought it's natural, mainly when you're actually operating in an environment like Zimbabwe. Then on 13 September, in the middle of the night, they came, they knocked down the door, they forcibly took me. They went with me some 40 kilometers outside Harare. They tortured me. At the end, they injected me with an unknown substance. I stayed in a hospital for about 4 weeks. And after that, I was operated on my stomach because I was actually being stamped on my stomach. So they wanted to construct my intestines. And after that, there was a lot of fear that was put in citizens in terms of what had happened to me. Then I said to myself when I get out of hospital, how best can I make sure that I do not become part and parcel of the people who actually start things and then they run away? So I created this situation whereby I started putting on mud on myself, moving in town, going towards parliament. It attracted a huge following that was following me. And when I reached the parliament, I started performing in front of the parliament. MPs came, they watched the play. And when the police wanted to arrest me, the citizens, they stood with me and said, no, he has not done anything. He's actually highlighting the problems that are happening in this country. So it was like one of the things that I could say, it gave me that motivation to say, the people they are so interested in what is happening. And they are also willing to be part and parcel of this to say, we need to fight for freedom of information. We need to fight for freedom of expression. And then lastly, I did another performance. This time there were 400 human rights activists who were arrested randomly. So there was nothing that was being done in actually bringing them out. They were just arrested and taken to court and remanded in custody. It was 3 weeks now, yet they were still inside the custody. Then I said, the MPs are silent again against this issue. The minister responsible for justice is silent against this issue. How then do I actually contribute so that the debate again starts happening about these people who were arrested? And then I put myself in prison grab, leg irons and hand chains. I started moving again in town, going towards parliament. It got so much in terms of attraction that even the police, when they sent Central Intelligence officials to try to arrest me, they couldn't, because the MPs were watching, the press was watching. So it was one of the ways that we have actually tried to use to make sure that we actually reach the people as many as we can, to hide behind numbers. It has got consequences. I am now disabled. I am now living separately from my family. I'm now a fellow at University of Manchester, case of the Artistic Protection Fund. Creative Dissent is one of the ways for me to actually believe that we can do more in terms of using art to change the issues that are happening in the world globe. It's using the arts for achieving change in the world. Thank you.
So Magnus, how do you, or does your organization, how does Freemuse work on cases like that?
Yeah, so my third hat of the night. Now it's my day job, working for Freemuse, defending the right to artistic freedom, and we have the privilege, of course, once in a while to work with wonderful people like Silvanos, and I knew him because we did a workshop in Harare about for a UN report we were doing, and then I stayed in touch with him and followed him on Facebook. He's very active on social media. I would definitely encourage you to find him. And then one day he texted me from his hospital bed, like the day after he was tortured and held for like 72 hours or something. And then he was in hospital and he texted me and said, this happened. And then we reached out to contacts. It's, of course, we're a small organization based in Copenhagen, and I'm here, and we don't have anyone in Zimbabwe, but we have a network of other activists and organizations, at least on the continent, and some in Zimbabwe. And he's in Manchester now. We connected some credit, connected some people, and vouched for him being a real activist doing this kind of work, so some other organizations with more funds could support him financially, and then ultimately the Arctic Protection Fund made this set up with Manchester University, where he is now for a year in this residency, and then we'll see. But how that ties into all our work, I thought I would just run through some of our strategy and the findings we have as an organization defending the right to artistic freedom. And so, yeah, maybe the first slide is fairly self-explanatory, that we defend the right to artistic freedom. We're a human rights organization, so it comes from the Human Rights Declarations, and under the right to freedom of expression and cultural rights, of course, artists and audiences, very important, have the right to express themselves artistically. When Tatiana asked me to do this part of it, I kind of tried to think about the concept of truth in relation to the arts, and we don't say that that it's true what we're like. We defend art because we think art is important and art has a value in itself. It's also a catalyst for change, but not necessarily, and who knows, and who's to judge what piece of art today will have an effect down the line, right? So, but I went back to this old quote by Picasso. I don't know if some of you might have seen it, and I butchered it a little, only to the shortest sentence. Like it's part of a sentence, but art is a lie that makes us realize the truth. And I really appreciate that, and from my perspective and our work, and kind of leave it at that, right? We need the arts. It's hard to pinpoint exactly for what, and does it change things, does it not? But we need it, and it makes us realize things about the world we live in. So that's why I'm very happy and privileged to do this kind of work that we do. And aside from Silvanos, we of course work with a bunch of other artists, and I wanted to show a quick video that kind of gives you an idea of the range of people we work with.
All that is banned is desired.
I was stopped over there, my car was blocked.
Louis Vuitton sued me because of the bag in the drawing.
They were kidnapped and taken to the victors.
Dole Food Company want to stop that story from reach out.
They can torture you, they can kill you.
There's a censorship practiced by the state whenever you go anywhere.
My work was withdrawn last minute.
I spent 11 years in a jail.
For the first time, there's been a gathering like this. We're bringing together 50 artists from around the world. They've suffered enormously for their work. There are people who've been in exile, they've had death threats. In order to carry on their work, they've overcome these obstacles and kept on going. It's an extraordinary tribute to their creativeness.
That's what's so great about this conference. You see all these brave people who've risked everything.
Events like this are creating networks that can support even better.
By expressing ourselves is how the world will change.
The most dangerous thing is silence. When there's no conflict, when nobody's put in jail, it means that the human spirit is dead.
Yes, that's some of the people we work with, and then my next slide is kind of very simple. It's I was almost should I put it together, but how we work as many other human rights organizations. We do put a lot of energy in research, trying to figure out what is happening on the ground around the world, in our own societies and other societies, and getting that and verifying that is of course tremendously difficult. Then we do campaigning. It can be everything from the very specific, we want this artist released immediately, to the broader advocacy strategies of getting a new UN process implemented or changing a law in a country. And then our third pillar is kind of the network, and why I'm here, to engage more people, to help with this and to share information, share knowledge. And I really appreciate the Disruption Networks Lab approach and this bringing, for example, whistleblowers, and I won't claim to be an artist, but the artistic perspective into the same room and have this conversation, I think is really great and wonderful. So going back to the research, just to give you an idea of how we see the world, this is our statistics for 2016. Every day we register new cases, and every year we do an annual report called Art Under Threat. We documented 3 killings in 2016, 2 artists abducted, 16 attacked, 84 artists imprisoned, 43 prosecutions, 40 persecutions or threats, and 840 acts of censorship. And this is, we use the cliche tip of the iceberg, as I said. It's very hard to verify, so I'm sure there's cases, in particular censorship cases, is close to impossible to count, but we try. But I'm sure there's others. And just to dive in a little bit on what kind of cases, now you know Silvanos, but some of the other cases we see, for example, are these guys. They're 5 Tibetan musicians, Tibetan monks, singing about a free Tibet or about the Dalai Lama. The lyrics I've seen, very peaceful and non-controversial to an ordinary ear, but to the Chinese state, that is something that can land you up to like 9 years in prison for this ridiculous charge of seduciously splitting the state. So there's many legal regimes around the world that have weird charges against good people. These guys are serving between 3.5 and 9 years in prison, and it's again one of those cases where it's really hard to figure out, are they still in, how are they being treated? We do some awareness raising, but it's very limited, and the Chinese obviously don't really listen to us. Even we have the UN send a formal request for information, they ignore that as well. Another case that I wanted to highlight from last year was this Turkish musician, Kutsal Evismen, and sorry if I butchered his name, I'm not that good in Turkish. He performed a song about a baby donkey, and in Turkey that is kind of a term for calling someone a fool, like an insult, but not a really rough, just like a mild insult. He was then subsequently charged and sentenced to 11 months and 20 days in prison for insulting President Erdogan. And the funny part about this is that he didn't mention the name Erdogan, he didn't mention anything about president, he was just thinking about a donkey. And it made me think of that Picasso quote of the little lies that make us realize the truth, right? It is incredible what President Erdogan, how thin-skinned he is, and how many libel charges and other charges he puts against all kind of people that criticize him, or maybe even just think about donkeys. So to zoom out a little bit again, we of course aggregate all this data, and these are the numbers you saw first before I just changed them into a bar graph, and organized them by violation type. So you have furthest to the left, I know it's a little small, killed, then abducted. The red dot there is Silvanos, right? Because he's in theater and he was abducted in 2016. Then attacked, imprisoned, prosecuted, persecuted, and threatened. And then you see the censorship one going really high up. And it's a bit of an animal this year because in Ukraine we saw this ban of 500 Russian films, and they were like specifically named, and then we counted as one act of censorship if it's a specific art piece that is banned from another country. So that's why that one is so high. Censorship is of course always high. And the next chart, it just kind of flipped it around, so now it's organized by art form. you'll see because of that Ukraine ban, film is obviously very, very high, and censorship in general all across all the platforms. Music is the second highest, and if you look at what we like to call the serious violations, not saying censorship and not serious, but the really like physical harm, or you're put in front of a judge one way or another, or attacked or threatened, then music is the hardest hit art form. The next slide, I just divided it out on countries and took away the censorship cases. So this is, again, only what we call the serious violations. And here you kind of have the usual suspects when you look at human rights violations. Iran tops with 30 violations in 2016, Turkey with 23, Egypt with 18. Nigeria was a bit of a surprise for us, and maybe we can go into that in the Q&A if you want to, and then Russia and China, or China and Russia, sorry, that order. So probably seen similar maps with other human rights violations in the past. I want to skip to then what we try to do about this and our approach, and I go back to that very simple slide I had before, and down to kind of the campaign advocacy side of things. Now we know this is the situation. We see similar trends in past years, and we see similar trends in other human rights fields. And our basic idea is, on a national level, we want to raise the cost of governments of doing this. So if a government imprisons someone, we want to make sure it's costly for them. I have no illusions that some Iranian government is going to change its mind and suddenly, oh, that was a bad idea to imprison this artist or this whistleblower. What is going to get people out is that it's such an annoyance for the government to have them in jail. If they get met with that question, why is this musician in jail, when they meet with foreign governments, when they turn on their TV, or if they go to social media, that is eventually what is going to change, that it's a more expedient strategy for the government not to have people in prison. So that's kind of standard human rights, but our approach on a national level. On a global level, I mentioned already, we engage a lot with the Human Rights Council at the UN, and it's a bit the trick, or the Universal Periodic Review process. If some of you know that, it's a process where every country, every member state of the UN is up for review every 4.5 years. So Germany is up, Zimbabwe is up, and other member states can critique and have constructive dialogue around their human rights record. So that's been a good vehicle for us to address artistic freedom. Human Rights Watch, Amnesty will also submit reports about torture, about women's rights, about the whole thing. And we then come in with our reports analyzing what laws and practices are violating the right to freedom of expression, artistic freedom in that country. At a regional level, being based in Europe, we engage with the European Union as much as we can, both on the European member states should respect artistic freedom. The neighboring and enlargement countries we see as a way, on Turkey, for example, to push our message and try to influence that the EU sets that as a standard, negotiating with other countries about becoming a member, that you at least respect human rights, freedom of expression. And of course also in partnership agreements with third countries, as they call it in the EU language. So when you have a trade agreement with Vietnam, that there's also some kind of acknowledgement that Vietnam needs to respect human rights and freedom of expression. At a cities and institutions level, is kind of, lack of a better word, what I call it, we work with these residencies and others. So Silvanos, for example, he's in Manchester via the Artist Protection Fund. And there's this icon city of refuge where cities can kind of host an artist or a journalist or a writer, started by Salman Rushdie, or like that whole wave when the fatwa against him was issued. And then finally, there's the artistic and activist community, and kind of you guys and us and all. And I think one of our key missions is to get everyone on board to collaborate around these things and make sure there's solidarity among us. So when an artist is targeted, or an activist or whistleblower somewhere in the world, that we collectively stand up and show solidarity and raise awareness, make sure they're not forgotten. Those stories about being forgotten in prison is, of course, something we hear a lot. And that's maybe my last slide, just to go back and be specific. This case from Iran that is really close to my heart, and two brothers, Mehdi Rajabian and Hossein Rajabian, Mehdi is a musician, Hussein is a filmmaker. They had this underground music distributor together, an online platform where you can listen to music. Traditional Iranian music that Mehdi, among others, played on his sitar. So not even any lyrics that criticized the regime or were very profane or anything. And these guys were first detained. Mehdi was allegedly tortured during interrogations, and then, this was back in 2013. Last year, they were then sentenced first to 6 years and now to 3 years in prison for insulting the sacred and propaganda against the state. And then on June 5 last year, they were put in jail in Evin prison. If some of you know the Iranian prison system, that's a pretty horrific place to be. A lot of political prisoners, but also a lot of drug addicts and drug crimes, like average criminals, rough situation to be in that prison. They've been on a hunger strike several times to protest their situation, and specifically their medical needs. And so I just wanted to finish off with that. On June 5, they've been there for a year, so we're going to do a big push to raise awareness. It's tough to engage with the Iranian government, but this is how governments kind of suppress artistic freedom. And of course, it ties into all kind of other opposition voices in Iran being treated the same way. So to kind of round up and conclude, I just want to, this is something you see over time, that governments and others in a position of power, they want to secure like a single dominant narrative, right? And I think that might be the common denominator for us up here. And artists and others are just an annoyance to that. They don't fit into one frame. They don't say the same as the government, right? They say the opposite, or they say something third. And I think with the rise of populism and nationalism, as we see now in many places of the world, like, I'm even more concerned, because that is very much the dominant agenda, right? It's to define that one narrative, who we are. We don't want to respect human rights, because that is a limitation on the will of the majority, right? I won, I can do whatever I want kind of logic, where the human rights regime is, of course, to protect the rights of the minority. But these populist and nationalist movements kind of seem to get that wrong. So I think it's important that we do things like that, we share information, we document these cases, and go out and get people out of jail. Thank you.
Thank you, Magnus. And as it is getting really late, and we're a little behind our schedule, I was asked to open the panel to the floor right away. And I would like to ask you to concentrate a little on countermeasures, on the question, what can we do? And maybe some of your questions and ideas contribute to that. Okay? So I see a hand. Oh, please, John. Now, see, first I asked too early, and now I nearly forgot you. John, would you please come here, if you're still there, which I hope very much. Oh, indeed. So, see. Okay, so maybe we start out without him. I see a hand right there in the middle. And maybe we ask one question or make one comment after the other, relatively short, so that one of the two speakers here can precisely answer them.
Yes, hello, hi, thank you very much. My name is Gisela. I work for a Latin American NGO called Derechos Digitales. I am Mexican, and I just want to thank Marcus for his intervention, because I just want to be honest, this was a bit too white for me. I believe that John's intervention was good, but he was still speaking of a prison that was less worse than Afghanistan, whereas in Mexico we have prisons controlled by drug cartels. So I still think it's a position of privilege, and it's in terms of classes, race and gender, maybe. So I just want to say that as a comment, and then my particular question regarding that, because it's always horrible to get that more than a question, I have a comment, right? So I do actually have a question. how do we approach this? And I also acknowledge that the British government, Latin American governments are going to do what the British government is doing now in 5 years. So how do we, and I really like your intervention because of that, so how do we address these problems from a universalist perspective without being too white, but just acknowledging that it is a trend and that power tends to behave the same in terms of co-opting narratives and distort perceptions about it. So, I don't know, whoever wants to respond that, I just felt I needed to say that. Thank you.
I suppose as the Brit I should. God, I'm going to blush again. I suppose there's one faint hope there that post-Brexit, Britain's just going to fade away to a certain extent and stop exerting this malign influence. But then I suppose who's going to then be the fountainhead of all things secrecy? I don't think the USA is a particularly good example either. I don't know. Over the last decade or so, I've been encouraged to see greater independence, a sort of breakaway spirit across Latin America on many issues, most notably, of course, things like the drug issue, or breaking away from the Western financial hegemony as well. The idea of Brazil getting involved in the Russian-Chinese new investment bank and things like that. So there is hope, but I suppose, as always in Latin America, we tend to see America then trying to meddle and keep control of what it conceives to be its own backyard, rather than sovereign nation states. After the unrest fermented in Venezuela, the potential coup in Ecuador that might be brewing, what happened in Brazil. So I think actually you've probably got more to worry about from America than Britain. But yes, I think Britain does set a very bad track that other countries, and America most notably, are going to abuse and use.
Yeah, and I maybe want to take your first point, and I really appreciate it, about privilege, and also use that to flip it and say, with everything happening with Trump, for example, one of the best comments I saw, or commentary on it, was Turkish journalists telling US journalists how they should now try to counter this, right? That we can learn, us white people in the global north, from people around the world, and we're in it together, and we are facing similar issues, right? It's not this us and them kind of logic. It is, people have gone through situations with repressive governments through history, and they do in all parts of the world. And if we as a community that believe in human rights and these freedoms work together, there's some, it's idealistic, but there's some hope there.
Please, we can't see you from here. So somebody just get up there, back there, okay, please.
Hi. Thank you, everyone, for the nice presentations. My question would be to Magnus, and I think Giselle's comment is really important. Thank you for pointing that out. I just have a question. I'm here. Hi. Thank you for the work you've done so far, and I was just wondering if you're doing anything, or do you know anything about therapy or a support group for the artists who are suffering from auto-censorship, asking for a friend?
Yeah, I guess it depends on where in the world, and support group specific for self-censorship or auto-censorship. I think groups like us, that's what we work with, and one of our big challenges in our research is to document this. How do you document all these numbers I show? You can't say this is one case of self-censorship or auto-censorship, which makes it really hard to deal with that issue. And what we then try to do is talk to artists on and off the record, get them to describe their situation when they feel they might self-censor or when they might not, and often they don't want to say this on the record. And then if that is because they're scared of the police, which is in many states, if they're scared for economic consequences, that's definitely also an aspect of it that is interesting and very complex. If it's because Apple, iTunes has you can't say fuck in the title on iTunes, right? Then your music won't be published there, and that will have economic consequences. Or it's because you're afraid of the Chinese regime coming after you. There's a lot of different issues in that. And depending on where in that equation you are, I think that we could help find someone that would know more about this situation, but I think it is very country-specific or local how the specific situation is. But as a global organization, we kind of try to address this as best we can and work with a lot of people on this.
Okay. Are there any more questions? Yes, back there, please.
So I have a question for Annie. You talked about how you wanted to start an organization that whistleblowers could go to with their concerns that would then investigate those concerns. But a lot of whistleblowers talk about how they've exhausted internal channels and that didn't work. So what would make this different from other internal channels? And also, how would this group be kept accountable and who would check that this group was investigating things as they said that they were doing?
Oh, absolutely. I think, I mean, this idea is because of the British setup where there are intelligence commissioners who are designed to oversee the intelligence agencies. And they haven't done a particularly good job. There's also a committee in Parliament called the Intelligence and Security Committee, which is absolutely crap. It's useless. It's had no power meaningfully for 23 years now. But having something external, like a commissioner or a committee, but with real investigatory powers and who really does their job. And of course, they'd only be trusted if they do that job and it's seen to be done and there are court cases resulting out of it. Then that, I think, would be a better path for both the agencies and also the staff, you know, the potential whistleblowers, to go down, because it would be win-win. It doesn't mean everything's brushed under the carpet. It doesn't mean that those who have committed crimes on the inside get away with it, as happens now, as we all know, because there would be resulting court cases if the evidence were found. Of course, that doesn't obviate the need for whistleblowers. If they feel blocked and it's not working, then of course they're going to go back to doing that. But I think it's always worth exploring potential other options, because at the moment, particularly in the UK, there is what's called a clear, bright line against disclosure. You cannot talk to anyone outside your agency or you go to prison. That's it. There's no defense, no nothing. The current review of the Official Secrets Acts has specifically excluded the need for reintroducing the public interest defence, which was removed in the '89 Act. So it's very messy, it's increasingly draconian. Britain is the most secretive intelligence community in any Western notional democracy. They are the most legally protected of any intelligence agencies. So it's trying to think what might be acceptable. I was talking in terms of the UK, what might be an acceptable first step. I don't think whistleblowers are going to go away. I don't think organisations like WikiLeaks are going to go away. That genie is out of the bottle technologically. So this is really trying to minimise the damage and improve the work of the agencies, because lots of good people do go and work there. They want a job that will make a difference and protect their fellow citizens. And for that initiative to be stifled or to be corrupted or to be crushed is a crying shame, I think. So it's really trying to find an avenue for these people.
Annie, was the trial against your partner, was it public?
Yes, the trial against David Shaler was largely public, but they would go in camera when the prosecutor said, we can't talk about this. Exactly. But what they're proposing now under the new Official Secrets Act is entirely secret trials that are not even reported.
So I think you said the public will learn about all that when the case comes to trial. Do you really think that, given, I mean, all empirical evidence is against that secret documents, and given the secrecy, the secretivity of the agencies, that anything will ever come out? And you said yourself, they can, if they provide a channel like that, they can prevent getting information into the public. I think there is information where the public has a right to know. And may I ask you, as a true constitutional patriot, as you turned out, what do you think about public whistleblowing?
I think that whistleblowing should be public. May I comment on the trial aspect as well? My trial actually was not public. I mean, I didn't make it up to trial. I took a plea, but in the United States we have this thing called SIPA, the Classified Information Protection Act. And so the entire courtroom is cleared. When I walk in, I'm allowed only my attorneys. There's the prosecution, the judge, and a clerk. And we're not even allowed to use certain words. So there's a list of words and then substitute words. So if I want to say a classified word, I have to say instead swimming pool. So we intercepted the swimming pool at the place, and you have to constantly refer to this list of words so you don't accidentally say a word that the CIA has deemed to be classified and then get another charge on top of what you've already been charged with.
Yeah, I would add to that as well. During the Shayla trial, the key story and the reason we went public was the Gaddafi assassination plot. And this actually made international, global headlines actually, and was a big cause célèbre. There were calls for inquiries, proper public inquiries into what the spies had been doing. The government denied it, blah, blah, blah. For the 6 weeks duration of David's trial, this disclosure, this story, was banned. It was banned under something called the Public Interest Immunity Certificates, which is a gagging order by the British government. And this was a super gagging order, so the press could not even say they were not allowed to talk about it, in case that might influence the jury, even though this had been headline news for years by that point, particularly in the UK. So it was sort of Kafkaesque in the sense that we weren't allowed to breathe that word during the trial. Journalists weren't allowed to write about that. I mean, some of them actually did go quite close to it, trying to say, we are being gagged, and risk prison for it. But yeah, it is Kafkaesque. It's frightening watching it in action.
And this is the experience with the court-martial of Chelsea Manning. I mean, the public was literally excluded from most of the trial.
This is an ongoing theme, actually. If I hope you don't mind my interjecting. Chelsea Manning went through this. Tom Drake went through this. Jeffrey Sterling in spades. The only way I could defend myself was to have 72 classified documents declassified. And so we poured through 15 or 20,000 classified documents. We found 72 that we believed proved my innocence. And we made 72 separate motions to the court to order these documents to be declassified. We blocked off 2 days, 2 full 8-hour days, in order to argue our case. So we walked into the courtroom, and before we even sat down in the chairs, the judge said, "Let me save everybody some time. I'm denying all 72 of these motions." We were in and out in a few minutes, and on the way out, my attorney turned to me and said, "We have no defense. If she won't let us have these documents, we simply can't defend you." I said, "So what do I do?" And he said, "We take a plea." Jeffrey Sterling went through the same thing. He ended up going all the way to trial, all the way to a jury decision, without the ability to defend himself. Chelsea Manning, the same thing. So that's why you end up looking at these draconian sentences of 30 and 35 and 45 years. You just don't have any way to win.
Yes, thank you. Now, we have heard this night different cases, and all are related to human rights, expression of freedom, and so on. Either directly, the artists who are persecuted, or as you were telling about the things in court which makes it difficult to defend what an ordinary citizen would call the human right. Now there is an international organization, Amnesty International, and I wonder why it has not been mentioned one time. Is it because this international organization is so weak, or is it sort of bought by the power, the governments in power, or what is the reason? or is it just, I don't know, just not of any importance? Why didn't you mention Amnesty International? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I begged Amnesty International to release even a one-sentence statement about my case. I wrote to Amnesty headquarters in London several times. I wrote to Zeke Johnson, the director of Amnesty International USA, who was kind enough to send me a subscription to the New Yorker magazine, along with a letter saying, I'm sorry, but they don't want to have anything to do with your case. And after about a year, I got tired of begging. I got zero help from Amnesty International, nothing.
Can I just add to that as well? Exactly the same experience. After Shayla's conviction, I went with our lawyer, who was the head of the equivalent of the ACLU in the UK, to argue that Amnesty in London should declare David to be the first political prisoner in the UK's history, I think, well, modern history. And we won that argument, and the political committee that was listening to us agreed and recommended he should be. But then it was stamped on from a great height by the controlling committee. So, yeah, I perfectly understand where you're coming from with that.
And yeah, we work with Amnesty sometimes. I think I might mention them once, and I know some of the critique, and we were aware of the human rights movement, of course, is this bureaucratization over time. It came out, they were going to use, depending on when you, but this whole movement, right, it's evolved, and now those big organizations, they are huge bureaucracies with a lot of rules, a lot of lawyers, everything goes up the chain, down the chain, several times before they say anything. And of course, when they then say something, it's verified and it's like credible in many, many ways. But it also makes them very inflexible in taking up cases that are a little odd. Like, they are big bureaucracies by now with, I think, the best intentions, but that is the limitation of the human rights regime, so to say, I think.
So the next time you all turn to us, Whistleblower Network, Germany, because we managed to set up a legal aid fund which may provide professional advice to you before you go public, if you want to go public. And as John mentioned, it's always better to ask for true professional help, especially with a complicated German situation where there is no whistleblower protection law at all. So our flyers and the possibilities to check in with us are waiting for you at the desk, at the entrance desk. And we would be pleased if many of you would make that decision and support us. I think Tatjana is telling me that I should wrap up this part of our event, and let me quickly say, and before she does it, and let me quickly say that I have the feeling that we have to be grateful for what whistleblowers, for what we and the civil society, that is the civil society, what we have learned from whistleblowers, and what we are still learning from them, from those being here and from those who are not here, and all the others who blew the whistle, because that gives us the possibility to act and decide upon what we then know. You were speaking about the US and the UK, and I must say in Germany we have pretty much the same problems. Whistleblowers are not, or even less protected than in the UK, in the US at least. Last year we have also passed several so-called security laws. That's the newspeak. I realized that Annie is righteously speaking of secrecy laws, whereas in Germany they are called security laws. So we have passed several security laws, and the parliamentary control of the executive and the military and the secret agencies, secret services is insufficient too, and we know attempts to intimidate the press too. So let us not accept that. And to say it in Norman Solomon's word, the other day he said, let's be a pain in the neck, he said. Let's be a pain in the neck. And let's publish everything. The public has a right to know, and let's not forget to ask, why is that secret? Why? The first question to ask, we have the human right of the freedom of expression and the freedom of speech and the freedom of the press, and let's ask, why is that secret in the first place, and not try to legitimize why we speak out. And most of all, and please keep in mind what Hannah Arendt, the philosopher or the social scientist Hannah Arendt has said, nobody has the right to obey.
I just want to conclude, but I don't want to give you my back. So no, I wanted to thank you very much for this great panel and also this great moderation, Annette. Annegret, sorry. So I just wanted to mention the people that are here, also that we can stay a bit longer and use the bar. So if you still have energy, please stay with us. And also I wanted to say, remember to buy the books of John that even signed personally. So that is really a unique piece. And I finally also wanted to thank other people of the team that I didn't thank yet. Of course, I wanted to thank the team of the Gruner Salon that helped us a lot with the technology, with the cash desk, and also with the bar. And Jonas Franke that did the great visual design that we saw at the event. The raw photo film crew that is documenting our video. And Thomas Schmidt, the photographer. And so I hope we will meet soon, and you can also follow us later on our activity. If you want to subscribe the newsletter, there is the paper at the exit. So now these little technicalities, and I want to thank again all the great speakers who have been with us today, and the public for staying also until so late. Thank you.
And thank you most of all, Tatiana.